Pranam to everyone. Welcome to our meeting for June 2025. I hope that all of you have been keeping well and continue to do so. So the topic that was given by the spiritual hierarchy, actually, it came from Rishi Master Byansa Duno. The topic is the Atlantean civilization. So this is actually quite an interesting topic. You see, if you tap into your own memory banks, what we call as the individual Akasha Chronicle, or look at where your shining body or causal body or the upper mental body is, you will actually find that you see everybody who is currently actually present on Earth has been present during the Atlantean civilization, right? So we won't call them our Atlantean ancestors because we were the Atlanteans, right? So those who don't have much of a background in evolution, basically, there are seven major actually periods, and just actually coming down, there are actually seven epochs. We'll actually start from there, and each epoch has actually got a sub epoch, right? So these seven epochs are like the Lemurian, which is the third, and then the Atlantean, which is the fourth, and now we are actually in the post Atlantean period, right? So very briefly, now, each of these epochs, for example, the Lemurian period, then the Atlantean, and now the post-Atlantean, each epoch is then divided into seven sub-epochs, right? So, and each of these sub-epochs roughly lasts about 2,240 years, which can be scientifically calculated. So when we were in the Atlantean period, see the Atlantean period, when we talk about it, we are talking about the Atlantean continent, right? So a number of islands had actually arisen about 5 million years ago, as speaking from now. That is when the Atlantean period had actually started. And it's interesting to note, when the ancient Greek philosophers, especially Homer, when they used to talk that there is an island there, there was a continent, the scientists actually didn't believe. But now you see, under the Atlantean Ocean, they have actually found this old Atlantean city, and there have been divers, from Germany and from England, who have actually gone down and discovered that there was actually an Atlantean civilization. Now, there's a lot of this actually available, but National Geographic has got a very interesting documentary on YouTube. It is about 45 minutes about the Atlantean, continent, the Atlantean civilization. Now, you see, the Atlanteans were very advanced. Their bodies were actually light, and they could virtually float, up to the level of the current mountains. They were actually capable of floating. And the first three sub-epochs of the Atlantean period is basically when they had actually gradually progressed, right up to the fourth, they had made immense progress, and solar energy also had actually been tapped. But you see, we have always got to take this into account. When you look at the progress of human evolution, what actually happens is that human beings become greedy, and then rather than utilizing the spiritual knowledge and the advancement for the benefit of everybody, we actually go against and break the cosmic laws of nature. So when you look at it, this thing happened towards the end of the Lemurian period, and the Lemurian period was destroyed by earthquakes. And then during the 5th, 6th, and the seventh sub-epochs of the Atlantean period, which actually John will actually touch in detail. Again, you see, we became extremely greedy, and there was black magic, and everyone wanted to be more powerful. Weapons were developed which were extremely destructive. So what happens then? You see, there was a great flood for about 48 hours, and that entire continent actually sank. The smallest of these islands, about 9,500 years before Christ, had actually sunk, and that is when the post-Atlantean period, what we call as the ancient Hindus, that sub-epoch actually then started. And you see, it is interesting to note when Rishi Master Bensaduno came, one, he came actually to warn humanity that we are on the same pathway. And actually, when you look at it again, we are exactly repeating what we did towards the end of the Lemurian period and towards the end of the Atlantean period. There is no brotherhood, there is no sisterhood, there is no common unity. Many times I've discussed in our lectures that look, the total amount of human souls is 60 billion, and this is actually one family. And the amount of black karma that the current wave of humanity has actually undertaken has been the worst so far in our evolution, to the extent that we are in a period of about 300 years, which started from 22nd of March 1914, and we are reaching the end of this current civilization. And when you paint the picture, which has actually been given, by many of the spiritual leaders, Steiner, Rishi Master Ben Sarduno, and so on, it is actually very bad, and the destruction will be quite awful of the current culture. Anyway, before we track any further with this, so always actually the message is to listen to your inner voice. Try and grow actually spiritually, and rather than functioning from your lower nature, which is your mental body, the thoughts, and then actually the feelings and physical activity, as long as there are good thoughts associated with good feelings, good activity, that is fine. But unfortunately, we are at a period where, the dark forces which belong to the lower astral world are one step higher than us. And that is why, all this negative karma of the current humanity as well, because they control us and they actually drive us. So we should always try and make an effort to try and function from our intuitive bodic level and our intellect upper mental body or upper mental levels. So just with this brief introduction, I'll get John to give us an overview of the Atlantean civilization. Thank you, John.
Rajiv, would I be able to get a co-host?
Sure.
I'd like to share the slides.
Oh, okay.
I need to sort of illustrate something for you rather than just me speaking.
Yeah.
Because I thought
you should be able to now.
Okay, great. Okay, can everybody see that at the moment? I'm just going to. Can everybody see that at the moment?
Yeah, we can see it, John. Yeah.
Oh, good, good. Okay, I'm just trying to illustrate something. I'm going to build into the picture of Atlantis, but before we need to go back to a certain time. Can you see my the arrow, which I'm pointing to a period called Hyperborean?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Well, in this Hyperborean period, we can sort of say that we were one with the sun, if you put it in a certain sense. The Earth was with the sun, and the solid Earth started to form within the sun in a strange way. But in a sense also, it was the Earth left the sun. So this is a period. But during this time, there were souls that were still immature, and the earth was becoming hardened because of what I call the moon forces. And because it was becoming hardened, these souls could no longer incarnate onto the earth. And so there began a migration towards the planets where they were able to evolve in the spiritual atmosphere of the respective planets. So we can talk about Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So I'm just trying to give a picture. And eventually this Earth became almost devoid of human beings during the Lemurian times because the moon was still with it, and it was becoming so hard that souls could not use the bodies that were available. And so we've got this mythology presented by the Christian Bible about Adam and Eve being two primal people who populated the earth and from which the earth population started. So in a way, this was true. The earth became limited to a very few souls who could actually have the strength to incarnate on the earth, whilst the others migrated to the planets. This has got a relationship to Atlantis, so I will link it up. And eventually, the moon was expelled from the Earth and circulated and is in its position where it was expelled towards. So these forces, darkening, hardening forces, left with the moon, and so people could now repopulate the Earth. So this is a picture, and these started to come in. But now if we go to look at where the position of Atlantis is, so we have, so in accordance with science, and I like science, it's worthwhile to try and put science together with spiritual information. Science talks about a nebula, so we can talk about the Polarian, and when the sun was there, formed and it condensed, we can talk about the Hyperborean. And when the Earth was expelled from the sun, we can talk about a Lemurian period, which had its own evolution. And here we come to the Atlantean period. And here we call the post-Atlantean period. This is where we're at the moment. And Anil's starting to talk about the sixth epoch and the seventh, where there'll be a further destruction, in the post-Atlantean period. And here we've got the parts broken up, where Anil mentioned the Hindu, we call it the ancient Indian period. Maybe I can get a better picture. That might be better. Here we are. So here we are at the moment, and we've got what we call the Slavic or Russian, and the American is the last one, before this era or this period ends in destruction. But before that, let's go back to Atlantis, before the ancient Indian period began. And so we can actually have a look here. It began perhaps with human beings that we might not call human at this stage. And what I mean by that is that our present existence commenced in this fourth period called the Turanian period. And this is where we could say, no, we were fully present, and I'll explain what that means. But here, we were still walking with the gods or the spiritual beings, or we were one with self, whatever you want to call it. During the day, Atlantis was, we could say, appeared misty. And
this part also gets very good network, this region. तो अब या तो वहां तक चल के उधर बैठ
Neha ji, please
unmute.
Put your audio off.
She needs to mute herself. Yeah. And so we begin with a period, the first, we could say, sub-epoch of Atlantis, where really we had not our final shape. We were still malleable. We were still flexible. So what was reflected in our soul life was reflected in our physical body. So if we were evil, then this evil, if you want to put whatever evil means in our terms, if we were misusing forces, our bodies grew to gigantic portions. And if we were good or whatever, then our stature appeared much smaller and much more formed in place. So we could talk about that first period. Okay. What I want to, everything is repetition upon repetition. So we're born as children or newborn babes, and we actually repeat every stage that we've gone through our evolution. So when we go through our evolution, what stage do we say I or I to myself as little children? It's about 3 years, isn't it? Just roughly 3 years, 2 to 3 years, the toddler. When you have children, people say I. And when did this stage occur in Atlantis? It occurred in the 4th stage. So the maturity of an adult Atlantean was at the stage of a little toddler. But he was guided by higher spiritual beings at that stage. But for the first time, during the 4th period, he could say I to himself. So I'll come back to this slide, but I want to go a little bit further to talk about why this occurred at this stage. Okay. Well, this is a good slide as well. And I want to mention, this is just from normal Google of human species in history. And I didn't realize this, but they've found 21 human species, different species, that have gone extinct. And these are the names, if I put it, and everyone's heard of Homo erectus, but only now what we call Homo sapiens, these are the ones, this is us. So what we talk about is we evolve through several physical forms. So I just wanted to say it's not so strange to science to say that there were different human beings at different times. And in a sense, on Atlantis, the same thing occurred. So it would make sense to say that our bodies could be more malleable, more formed from our soul. We were more watery. Now, when Neil mentioned that we could fly or, lift off the ground, the Ramayana, everybody knows that from a Hindu perspective. What did they have there? They had flying chariots, didn't they? They had the monkey god, Hanuman, Ravana, the demon who they fought against. So there was these great battles in the air. But what was it really? This was a memory of Atlantis. And at that time, Atlantis was more a nature realm. According to Steiner, the physical laws have been only constant since about 8,000 BC. Before that, they were in flux and conditions were totally different. And in Atlantis, the water, the air was much denser than what it is today, and water was much less dense than what it is today. So we've got different laws there. But also, the Atlantean, which is us, also was able subconsciously or instinctively to use the forces from the seeds, the forces from reproduction, and was able to steer many things through spiritual forces to either good, growth and reproduction could be steered in a positive way, but also it could be misused. So if we look at the forces from seed, at the moment when we have a little seed, it starts to germinate. There's a power in there. And the Atlanteans, which we have lost since then, were able to harness this, just like we harness coal today for power or whatever. The Atlanteans were able to harness the power of seeds and utilize this. So their whole system was built on nature. What were their homes like? Well, their homes were natural homes, built out. The growth in Atlantis was, of course, prolific. The Earth's dying now compared to Atlantis, but during the Atlantean time, the vegetation was immense, and so the homes and cities of Atlantis was really based on natural nature, plants, all interweaving together, which could make their habitat more like the cities or communities, which was there in the past. The concrete entities that we see today, which were only a few thousand years old of ancient civilizations like the ancient Egyptians or the ancient Hindu civilizations, which were made of stone and whatever, really didn't quite exist in the same way on Atlantis. These were natural artifacts or artificial natural civilizations, so there aren't going to be too many artifacts from the Atlantean period because they could use the natural artifacts. Okay, so what do we have here? In the first period or the first three period, the Atlantean couldn't say I to themselves, yet they still existed. How did they work? And these were before the age of 3. We've got the toddlers. However, the Atlanteans at this stage, they had the consciousness before the age of 3, but when we actually look at our little children, they actually live in what we call the spiritual world. So did the Atlantean at that stage. When the Atlantean went to sleep, he walked among the gods, so to speak, the spiritual beings. That was his true home. The spiritual world and the Atlantean were one. The earth was something, well, mystified. You could imagine that if he lived with the gods, it wasn't the place that he really wanted to be, but he had to be during his waking consciousness, and he had to survive his waking consciousness. So who were these gods? Well, I'll put it in the first way. If you look at this is a hierarchy of beings. These are based from Christian esoteric terms, but you can call them different beings. Maybe Indra is in this category as a being. I haven't put them together, but the names are familiar. But the closest to man is the angel in terms of the person directing us. But below this are those human beings or initiates or high spiritual beings who can still guide humanity today, and they also guided humanity during Atlantis. There's another term called archangel, another step higher. And today these beings are what we call folk spirits. They work, if you've noticed, there's a characteristic of Italians, there's an Italian characteristics, or there's an Indian characteristic, or there's an American characteristic. These characteristics work through our feeling habitual life, and we call them folk souls. This is how they work today. And these archai, they're beings that guide civilizations along, that actually provide impulses for big changes in civilizations. So you can see a hierarchy. We don't need to go higher than this, but I just want you to get a feeling that there was a hierarchy of spiritual invisible beings working amongst the Atlanteans, but at night time, they especially were within these two realms of hierarchical beings. The angels, we can call them devas, or certain degrees of devas. In other terms, they're called Dhyanic Buddhic beings. Lots of different names. So I just want to give you a picture that during the night, the Atlantean walked among these beings. Now, I also want to get you a picture, at least two parts of us, of what we consist of today. First of all, everybody knows we have a physical body. And we also have what we call life. Everybody can feel their life, can't you? You can also see that in common with the plants. And we can call that a life body, linga shaira, or etheric body. But also today we have what we call an astral body, which is the body of consciousness. And we can call it I. It's been called different words, Atma, ego, spirit, the immortal part of man. I just want to give you the characteristics of what we are today. And there are future possibilities, but just to look at this life body. Now, when this life body is not really connected to the physical body fully, you might say it moves past the physical body, and this was in the past. It wasn't sort of coinciding with this physical body. What happened, it was allowed human beings to naturally have spiritual experiences. Now today, when the human being receives a shock, let's say he has an accident and falls from a great height, or they're near drowning. Many of you would have heard that people have their whole life pass by them, all in one go. Or when they're on an operating table near death, they actually can see the operation occurring from above. That's when the etheric body leaves. The other part of the etheric body is when somebody has their arm amputated or their leg amputated, people sometimes can feel their phantom, they call it a phantom limb today. So coming back to Atlantis here, people here had their etheric bodies not quite connected fully with the physical body, and therefore were naturally able to be with the spiritual world and could actually work from this. But what they didn't have is a consciousness of I. They couldn't really direct themselves until, you might say, the fourth period, where they said I. They felt themselves, just like a 3-year-old child feels himself. When before it's Johnny does this, or Pradeep does this, or Pradeep did this, or Anil did this. They don't say I to themselves before that age. And that was a thing of Atlantis. Now, we've got parents when we grow up. So who did the Atlanteans have? Well, there are mystery schools called, you've probably heard of oracles. That's a term. And that's a place where human beings can contact higher spiritual beings for directions. Now, Atlantis had this as well. They had 7 oracles. And one of them was the Sun Oracle, which was the highest. But also, now I mentioned before that human beings migrated to the planets to evolve further. Well, the human beings who migrated from Mercury came to the Mercury Oracle. Human beings who migrated to Venus for a long period of time before they could find earthly bodies migrated from the Venus and belonged to the Venus Oracle, etc. So these were special spiritual places where human beings could contact the higher beings, say from Mercury, from Saturn, from Jupiter, and from the Sun, and receive directions on how to live. And these flowed like children. We get instructions. Our parents tell us, don't do this, don't do that. Or you are parents at the moment, and you tell your children, hey, don't do that. You direct them. And this is what happened from these oracles. The Atlanteans were directed in what to do. And there were some human beings who were chosen. They were chosen to be leaders of the Atlantis in each phase of the oracles. And they were, you might say, individually tutored by the gods. Or I might have an example here at the moment. We have Anilji, who is spoken to by discarnate souls called Ramana and Beniswa Junov. So in the same way, even higher beings, you might say, taught other human beings to spread what they had to do amongst the Atlantean people. And so we go that they started to incarnate further. Now here, in what we call the first period, the lion is the sign under which the first period was. In the first period, the human beings really didn't have its present shape. And I mentioned about human species that actually have died off, which are no longer present. So here, there was different shapes of human beings, and they were molded by their own inner life. So if the inner life was pure, then the shape, the outward physical shape was pure. And so we went on up to this period called the Turanian period, where the human being could say I to themselves. And what made this possible? It's when the etheric body became the same shape as the physical body, but there was a price for saying I to oneself. When the human being could say I to themselves, then they lost that natural spiritual ability that came of itself. So now, in one sense, you could say not everyone achieved this state straight away. There was still much that went to the sixth period and to the seventh period. But as we progressed, there were human beings, which we can call the initiates, who knew the spiritual laws. You might say they also betrayed these spiritual laws to normal human beings, who then misused them. And as Anil said, when we misuse spiritual forces, certain catastrophes occur. And gradually, the misuse of the seed energy, the reproductive forces, the growth forces, these were misused like anybody. You know, you get something for nothing and you want to say, oh, well, I want something more of that and I don't want to work for it, so I'm going to take it. So these human beings gradually were the cause of the destruction of Atlantis through catastrophic water forces. So what we do inside us eventually gets transferred to the outside world. Now, this was already in the plan, if I put it this way. So who was this? We heard of a being called Manu, perhaps in Hindu literature. Probably everybody of you have heard of Manu. Now, Manu really was the guide or the spiritual guide of the whole of Atlantis. And I've tried to figure out, he was a higher being who was able to incorporate himself into a human being from time to time and guided the civilization forward, if I put it this way. There were also, those, he couldn't help the fact that other human beings will take this knowledge and misuse it, but that was already in the plan. So during the fifth period, which we call the Semitic period, Manu gathered a number of human beings who he would consider the most advanced of Earth or Atlantean culture. And who were these people? Were these the most spiritual? No, these were the people who had started to lose their spirituality and have developed the ruminants of thinking, the ability to think for themselves. So he was able to gather these people who could take thinking onto themselves, but the price of this was to lose that natural spirituality. And so in the fifth period, he gathered these people up, and it was a small group, and eventually he left Atlantis with this group of people and wandered, you might say, over the top of Europe. And from there, he sent other people forward to commence, or for future times, to commence what we call the ancient Persian civilization, as well as the Egyptian civilization. So we send groups of people forward, And then he went past, if you put it this way, into a place in Central Asia, which we now call the Gobi Desert. And he kept these group of people separate from the rest of the people around the Asian area. And you might say that this actually was the first beginnings of the caste system, which was quite right and proper for the Indian civilization to take up. In other words, a group of people was kept apart from the other people because they had special qualities in order to lead the people forward. And as you know, or you've heard of, the 7 holy rishis. Well, when the time came for these people to be active, whilst at Atlantis, these people were developing, whilst the rest of the Atlantis was going through the Akkadian and the Mongol period. But these were like an overripe fruit. And a lot of these civilizations started to misuse the Atlantean knowledge for their own benefits, and hence the catastrophic water forces occurred. You might also, some of you might have watched, I mean, you do watch things like, well, I've watched them anyway, things like the Game of Thrones, or things like where this is in a way a memory of Atlantis. They actually go back to the, put it into modern terms, but it's kind of like recalling in modern form what happened to Atlantis and the chaos and the battles and whatever happened, but not necessarily the spirituality behind Atlantis. They would never be able to recall that in the modern films, but it's kind of an attempt to go back. And as we go back to, well, let's go back to the Ramayana and we look at, you know, as I said, the magical weapons that they were used in the battles with Ravana and his cohorts. You know, the good against evil and Ramana eventually triumphing. All this comes from Atlantis, you know, and the magic chariots based on this seed exercise, the seed power, they could actually use craft to fly using the energy of seeds. Now, that is probably not provable by science because the laws have changed. But if you can imagine that as I said before, the atmosphere and the physicality of Atlantis was slightly different to today, and the physical laws were different, then these magical chariots, which will seem magical today, could appear at that time. So the Ramayana is actually a memory of events at Atlantis and how the gods entered into human beings at that stage and were able to guide Atlantean civilization. So going back to the ancient Indian period here, we have what we call the 7 holy rishis. Now, Manu saw to it that they received the 7 highest etheric bodies of the Atlantean civilization. Now, there is a spiritual law. Everything spiritually developed in a positive sense is retained. So the 7 highest initiates of the separate oracles, you know, the Venus, Sun, Mercury, Mars, Saturn oracles were retained and implanted into 7 individualities. Now, these rishis in normal life, they just appeared as simple people. But when they were to speak to the people, you might say they attracted the wisdom of the gods into the etheric body and could speak the highest spiritual truths. Now, I mentioned before, you saw the diagram of the archangel or the angels. They were able to work through the holy rishis, and the echo or the first, you might say, the origins of the Vedic teachings came from these rishis and were spoken. These were divine documents that originated at this time. So And this was under the direction of Manu. And I mentioned before that Manu sent colonies out further from Europe. Well, the Persian civilization was one such started from the impulse that was started from Manu. And Manu also started this civilization, the Egyptian Chaldean. But the Greco-Roman period, where the intellect was developed, that was becoming purely human. And the same thing with our present. And later on, in the Slavic Russian and the American, there'll be a new Manu who'll be a human being, one of the greatest initiates or spiritual teachers of mankind, will then start to direct human evolution from this point. Okay. So what was the quality of the Atlantean here? He had a boundless memory. He could remember everything, but he couldn't think it through. So if you know, in the old days, human beings who achieved an advanced age were highly respected. But today they're not highly respected. Why is this so? Sometimes human beings today, they say, oh, they're simple people, they're old men, you know. In fact, well, I'm an old man now too, so you could say that of me. But the thing is that the age was highly respected, and the reason being was that their memory, they remembered things which others couldn't, and they could recall. They had wisdom of age. So a man of 50, by his own nature, not by his efforts, because of his age, he had wisdom flowing through him. He could remember things that had happened time again, what happened to his ancestors. So he had a store of memory which people could come to receive advice, we might say. So this was a unlimited memory. And this is preserved in some cases where people are able to remember whole epics today. You know, say they could remember the Mahabharata or the Ramayana just from memory. There's a preservation of it, but most of us have a limited memory. And as we grow older, and if you become like me, you start forgetting things. And we have to make a conscious effort to have this memory. But this was natural. But thinking was not there. But also the physical brain wasn't fully developed as well. It only became fully developed in our present form, which we call Homo sapien, was really given during this fourth period. We developed this form where you could say that these Turanians were like us, except, of course, they hadn't developed thinking. Thinking was fully developed or really came onto its own in the Greco-Roman. Okay, so why is this happening? We are like little children. We were there. Anil mentioned this. We were incarnating in various parts of the world, not only in Atlantis, but Atlantis was the center of civilization. What was happening was that our guiding beings wanted us to develop ourselves up to the point where we could say I and start to take over our self-development. Here, right in up to the first three phases, our maturity was less than that of a toddler, except we had incredible instinctive powers. If you look at some of the animals and look how they work instinctively, this is how we work. We had great wisdom, but it wasn't our wisdom. We could do marvelous things, but it wasn't due to our own efforts that we could do this. We were, walking with the gods. We were one with the gods. But here we gradually lost it. And as I said, we lost it. And even in the Indian civilization, what was practiced was a yoga so we could go back to the memory and to the experiences of walking with the spiritual beings or walking with the gods. So yoga had to be initiated in this Indian period, which we have now today, where we go back to this memory of the gods and actually are able to be in this spiritual world. We might call this a state of awareness as well, if you want to put it that way. We actually go back to have this original state where we were one with self or with the spiritual world. But we do this now consciously. It was still achieved in an instinctive fashion because the holy rishis instructed how to do this, and every step of the way was guided to achieve going back into the spiritual world. Less so in the Persian, and even less so in the Egyptian Chaldean, and basically here we had lost all connection except for a very few people with the spiritual world, and today most people have lost all their connection with the spiritual world. But we have achieved, you might say, incredible strength of being able to direct ourselves back to the spiritual world through our own strength and initiative, entirely up to ourselves. Why do we need to do that today? We need to do that today because the beings that I mentioned, you might say they're slowly departing. They're no longer going to guide us. We have to go to them consciously through our own strength, whereas in Atlantis, they were there with us. I might mention other beings as well. In every stage of development, there are, well, let's say in a classroom, in the old days in Australia, at my time, we don't do that anymore. If a child stayed behind a bit or wasn't catching up with his fellow classmates, he would be kept behind a year. We don't do that. But the same thing happens with spiritual beings. So there were, from a previous, what we call the moon evolution, certain beings called angels today. We can call them, never quite reached the angel stage, but they were still far advanced of human beings. So they could actually incarnate into human bodies here and actually lead human beings forward. These were the god kings of old, if we want to put it that way. They were almost angels, but they weren't quite. They were far beyond the human, but they still weren't reached the angel stage. So as a blessing, these backward angels could incarnate into human bodies and be our leaders as well in the Atlantean period. And this occurred right up, we might say, right up to perhaps the Persian period, but it became less and less. So we must also thank these backward angels for being our guides. They received instructions from the angels, but were able to encompass a physical body, whereas the higher beings couldn't reach down to the physical body. It would defile them if we use that expression. And today it's even more so. The present time, we need to go up to our spiritual guides, raise ourselves up so we can be in communion with them. They can't go down because the earthly material, I'll use the word, defiles them.
Yeah, the sound is gone, John.
Yes, sorry. I was looking at my notes at this stage here to sort of see what else I could say. Yeah, about it. What time is it now? I can't see the time.
It's 4:53, so a few more minutes.
Okay, I'll try and sort of have a look and see what the others are. Okay. Okay. Now, here we've got the Atlantean period here, the flood. So what we can see, where does it fit in and where are we going? In other words, why are we doing this? Why are we learning where we came from? Previously, I talked about old Saturn old sun, an old moon, and these are incarnations of the earth. And as we incarnate, we also excarnate. Now, I'm about 73, and I'm going to, I don't think I've got too much more to go, more than 10 years or whatever, but if I'm just taking a guess, I'll excarnate. What happens is that whatever's built up must get destroyed. That's always interesting. So in Atlantis, in old Saturn, it built up to where the physical body was formed. This is our human physical body. It got destroyed. In the old sun, we built up to where we became plant-like, where it was destroyed. In the old moon, we developed consciousness, but not self-consciousness. And here, in the fourth period, Atlantis was the most advanced in terms of the physical earth life. And from Atlantis onwards, from the middle of Atlantis onwards, the earth is being destroyed. Slowly it will die to the point where it will no longer exist. Just like myself. I was a child, I grew up, I've reached my peak, and now I'm in decline. My physical body is. Not necessarily my spirit, but my physical body is in decline. So with Atlantis, you find that there it built up to the greatest possible life. And from that's the middle of our Earth evolution. And now, today, even now, we sort of say, you look at the Sahara Desert, you go back about 10,000 years or 5,000 years ago, there was greenery there and all that, and it's growing bigger and bigger. So we shouldn't be disappointed that things grow and get destroyed. Now, in Atlantis, it got destroyed by floods, by people misusing their forces, which were, if I might say, for their own benefit. But also, that was also foreseen, that they would misuse these forces. So we could say, and if you remember Noah's Ark, you might know some of the Christian mythology of Noah's Ark. The earth was becoming evil, if you get the picture, and God told him, take up 2 of every animal, build an ark, and take them and save the earth. Now, that's a mythology, if I put it, in the Jewish Christian Bible, or even in the Muslim Bible. And but the reality of that mythology is Manu and his migration. In the 5th sub-period of Atlantis, he took up these people. I'll go back to it. You know, during the 5th period, he chose a small number of people to survive the Atlantean catastrophe. Mind you, there were further migrations at the end as things became intolerable with the Atlantis basically sank due to these catastrophic water forces. But migrations occurred elsewhere, but they weren't of significance because people died out. So any of these people that started to misuse forces, the spiritual forces, in an immoral way, these people died out. And I mentioned scientifically, these are some of the people, I don't even know, Homo erectus, these were some of the forms they took on. Geez, I haven't even heard of these names, but these Homo Neanderthal man, everyone's heard of that. These were forms that were taken on, but they weren't the chosen form. These were forms that were gradually misused and couldn't go on. So a human being like you and I could no longer incarnate in a Neanderthal man. But yet this was only recently that this form actually died out. These other forms, and I'm sure there were many other forms, and Rudolf Steiner talks about these many other forms that actually died out. So even what we are today, our present form, may not go on. It may go on from a few chosen people again, if we talk about our present civilization, which Anil talked about, eventually this present civilization, which we call the fifth root race or the fifth post-Atlantean race, will be destroyed by another quality, and it won't be catastrophic forces, it'll be nature forces, it'll be catastrophic human evil forces. Will be against each other. We call it the war of all against all. So Lemuria was destroyed by earthquakes and fire, but again, through human immaturity and immorality, the fire forces were used. Atlantis was destroyed by water catastrophes. But this next phase, and we can kind of see it coming, that the human immorality will gradually bring this age to a close. But there'll be a small group of people to continue, and civilization will again flourish. What the main thing to realize is it doesn't matter too much about the physical body, because this consciousness or awareness that goes forward will again take on new forms. So we don't have to get dismayed by what's coming to us. We could sort of look forward and say, yes, these things are happening to us so we can evolve even further to spiritual heights. So what's the actual ultimate goal? Atlantis produced this phase here. Its culmination really was when the human being could say I to itself, and the human physical body took on a definite shape that we have now today. That was its culmination. But, it allowed thinking then to occur. And thinking, if we didn't have thinking today, we couldn't think of spiritual concepts. We couldn't think of abiding in self. We couldn't think of becoming one with self. We need thinking to be able to understand it. And then we need thinking to practice these exercises. And today, the culmination is thinking. Obviously, developments occur further on. As Atlantis progressed, certain things developed. Out of these other civilizations, we have migrations to China. We call them, I don't know why these names, but you can sort of picture the Mongolian civilization. It peaked. The Mongolian civilization really peaked, you might say, in a certain way, with Genghis Khan. And Genghis Khan, he conquered most of the world, but that was a remnant of Atlantean power. But it diminished. It no longer can go on. And the Mongolians are different today and whether they'll ever get the power back that was, eventually the Mongolian impulse will die down, and it has. The Genghis Khan is only a memory of what could be achieved. But again, that was karmic. But what will go on is our thinking, and we will use our thinking to reach a spiritual height where we start to create ourselves. Today, what was developed here as I, and here as thinking capacity, will then come to the point where those who can create themselves, what we mean by creating ourselves is a balanced pathway of spiritual development. We will be able to withstand the catastrophic events that are coming that Anil described, but we've got to do that consciously and master what's in front of us. I'd probably like to open it up to questions, if we could, if that's all right, Anil. If there are any questions that we could, I'll stop sharing it, and I might speak with everybody. I don't know if I've made myself clear, and probably I haven't. It's a difficult concept, so I might speak to something that you have a problem that I probably didn't explain well.
Let's do one thing. We'll get Vijay ji to summarize, and then
Okay.
we open it for questions. Just stay on, and then we'll cover any questions related to anyone might have, and we'll continue recording this. It's very beautiful, actually, very deep what you've presented today, John. Thanks a lot for that. Vijay ji, would you please summarize, in 5 or 7 minutes?
Yes, yes. Oh. So this topic that has been chosen by Anil ji on behalf of what information he's received from the higher planes, it's sort of talking about the periods where the development took place before even the earth was formed, and then the Atlantean plane and period, and post Atlantean period. But that is to discuss about a generic period which everyone passed through, living beings passed through. When we come to the stage of the present, which we are in now, and I'm not talking about semantics, but we are talking about right here and now. The individual is considering that oneself as this body, and then relating itself to the past and talking about this period and that period, and then reflecting on what could happen in the future. All that is conjuncture, because what the past was is dead and gone, and what is due to happen in the future is only conjuncture. It is not true or a fact right now. All that is true right now is the here and now. Considering this, and considering that one has this consciousness of this body being I, and the ego existing within this, the main aim for this individual is to try and find out why we are having all these questions, and what are we doing to try and go beyond what we call as the suffering. So all the floods that we are talking about, all the issues that happened in the past and what could happen in the future, is not real right now. Right now, it is only what I am going through as an individual. And as an individual, am I going through suffering, pain, sorrow, joy, happiness? Fleeting happiness, mind you, because it comes and goes. This so-called happiness that is experienced comes and goes. And it is swinging like the pendulum. When that is the case for the individual, the important thing to note is that one has to then go beyond these different planes that were discussed. We are talking about, the physical body, the astral body, the causal body, the akashic body, the mental body, baudic body, etc., etc. And then finally the atmic body, which is the plane where the ego drops away, the doership drops away, and there is only that pure consciousness one revels in. Because that is seen from the standpoint of not an individual I, ego, but from the totality of consciousness as I. that ever existing I. And then when that very transcending happens, the body still functions, but is not affected by this, what happened in the past, in which period, and what may happen in the future, because one is at that standpoint of that ever changeless, eternal, the potential, because now we are in that period where it is dynamic, where it is changing. Every moment there is changing. Cells are being born, cells are being died, rejuvenated, and the entire system of life as such is based upon sacrifice of each cell in the body dying to be rejuvenated as a new cell. As they say in science, that every 7 years the entire body is rejuvenated, new cells are born. Then how come we remain the same mentally, going up and down, whereas the body is growing? Things are changing in the mind, but it's always the same fluctuations, weaknesses, strengths, etc. How do we go that step further is the question that is to be discussed, because that is the most pertinent question to this individual who considers oneself as this I. To be able to go beyond it is the sadhana that we are talking about. And that is what was discussed about the 7 points that the soul has, which is, you've got the sense of free thinking, you've got the moral feeling, that, it's a gyroscope of morality showing you the way of morality. Then sacrificial will. The sacrificial will is what we just discussed about sacrifice. That is what life is completely and totally dependent on, whether it is outside in the world. Something sacrifices itself for the other. Even in a tree, for example, a seed is sown. The seed itself has to die for the sapling to arise. The sapling has to die for the plant to grow. The plant has to die to grow into a bigger tree. The roots have to go down. The tree has to grow up. And then the fruits are born to be had for all to partake. And that is the fruit of self-realization, the fruit of purity, fruit of being one with that changeless rather than up and down of the changing. Because the changing and the changeless are no different. You are already what you are seeking. But at the moment, because of the veil of ignorance, as it were, one cannot perceive and see the truth. And that is the goal. That is the seeking that one has to do. So all that is being discussed about has only one and one meaning, and that is what we just discussed right at the start, where we said, oh, these Zoom settings should be more one-on-one. and then the most important thing is the Zoom sessions being one-on-one. Why can't we have that same Zoom with oneself and zoom in and have that one-on-one with the self which is hidden right here, there, waiting for you. Do that. And there is complete releasing from all this to be one with that pure, absolute Sat Chit Ananda, absolute existence, absolute consciousness, absolute bliss. Hari Om Tat Sat. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnaat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vijayji, for the summary, trying to connect the changeless with the changing. We'll continue with the recording now. If anybody has got any questions, anyway, we can discuss anything, but particularly in relation to the Atlantean period and the lecture that John has given, can we please come forth? We'll just throw the session completely open now. So since we are recording, I would like that someone or the other continues to speak, you see.
Well, look, whilst the question's occurring, Vijay, I'd just like to, that idea of sacrifice that you mentioned, that we need to have, that quality came right at the beginning of our so-called Saturn evolution. And when that occurred, it could be passed down to human beings. So we have this quality because something else was able to pass it down. So, but I totally agree, sacrifice is something that we need to be able to embrace, very much so.
Yes.
And we need to sacrifice our own personal self. Yeah, sorry, someone's asking.
Yes,
Yes,
Prashantji.
John.
Thank you, John, for that very interesting Atlantean civilization lecture. Thoroughly enjoyed and absorbed in what you said and where it is leading to. I was just thinking that in some respect, it is like a whole civilization that is moving forward stage by stage, with some people being a little ahead of behind, but it is like we are all evolving and moving forward. It is like Buddha, who used to say that I, the enlightened, have come, but will go, and others will follow. And our roles will continue till the whole civilization moves forward. It is like he's saying that I would rather remain on the earth till the last living being is being picked up. I don't want to be residing in any other world. So I see this connect between what you are saying, that as a civilization, as the 60 billion souls that Anilji talks about, we are holding hands and going together in this in one way, aren't we?
Look, the way I sort of, my picture, and as I said, this is my picture, is that the earth and all of us are one, and we're in it together. If we leave our fellow brother behind, we've left part of ourselves behind. So even if we become the most advanced person, we must come back and help our fellow brothers, because things are going to get tough, and we need to have that strength to bear it, but also to be, as Vijay said, to sacrifice our own development sometimes for the other, because we're in it to help each other, for all of us to rise, because we can't, those who have risen because the others have sacrificed themselves in other ways and have been left behind. We need to bring them up together.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else, please? Any other questions? Or anyone wants to say anything?
Yeah, I just wondered, John, where do you place China in this scheme of things? I mean, the Chinese civilization. Sorry, my video over.
Look, a little bit of speculation, but I will say that to a certain extent they're part of the later parts of Atlantis, and You remember that the Chinese civilization around about 1200 or 1000 AD, it actually had been the most advanced civilization on Earth. So it is a part of the Atlantean and has reached the peak. And in a certain way, it now has absorbed a lot of, what do I put it? It's taken on Western values now. The Chinese values are kind of left behind. They're being left behind more and more. And, the materialism of the West and, the money, the economics, because it had a great civilization in 1000 AD reached a peak. Europe was far behind. Most of the civilizations were far behind in that. So that's kind of, you might say, a heritage of the Atlantean period. I'm not saying it can't go further, but the feeling is I've got it reached a peak and now needs to get a new impulse to go forward. And where that will come from will be another question for the Chinese people itself to see, because it has taken on a Western approach. But that's my view. It's hard to sort of see when you're seeing they've taken on the Western viewpoints and are developing it. They've become, the technocrats. They're becoming, to a certain extent, the Americans are still the technocrats, if I put it in a certain way, but the Chinese are catching up. So, but they're using a different impulse than from what they had before.
So just to
actually,
add,
I got sorry.
yeah, sorry, yeah, continue, please. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, I was just so actually I got curious about this because actually there is a great resurgence of Chinese mythology programs, and in which they're really drawing on a lot of their old mythic ideas. So that's why I was curious. So, but that's okay.
Yeah. Look, there may be something in it. I'm only just saying, and I do agree with you, but I've just got a question mark on how far they will go from the past. Because at the moment, Anil pointed out certain catastrophes which are going to happen. And whether we talk about, today with America's situation on tariffs, will that trigger an economic collapse or whatever? We don't know if it's immediate or later. Some spiritual teachers, many spiritual teachers are talking it's going to happen now. Like imminent within the next 20 years, there will be a major collapse. I can't speculate. So whether the old, what I'll put is that we, as part of our heritage, we have developed a point where we must work from, as Vijay said, out of the present. What is in front of us, we've got to transform and spiritualize it, and that includes technology. Technology was not there a few thousand years ago. Technology needs to be spiritualized or it will crush us. So, yeah. So, yeah, sorry, I couldn't quite answer your question because it'd be speculation.
Yeah. Just I'll add something to this. In 2018, when I was touring Bulgaria, there were a lot of transmissions from Rishi Master Biansa Duno and the spiritual hierarchy, and the future of basically where we are actually heading towards and this destruction. You see, you mentioned correctly that China reached its peak in 1000 and then the decline is there. But one of the big mistakes, naturally, the universal law of karma, that's how it takes hold. You make mistakes and it actually corrects you. So, they came and they occupied Tibet, right? Now, if you look at Tibet, that is actually spearheaded by Gautam Buddha, right? So in the spiritual hierarchies, that created a big fulcrum, right? So the price for that is that China will pay with its own country actually being completely, dissolved, and there are going to be huge lakes. When the new continent rises, and there'll be big lakes in Asia, and that is the price which China pays as we are actually going forward. So I asked the spiritual hierarchy, I've just added that to circle this, that where we are actually heading towards, right? Because the spiritual hierarchies, they wait and they wait and they wait, and then gradually, as what we call gradual creation follows, so everything is compensated as we sort of go further. See, one of the things we have actually got to realize that as much as the changeless reality is there, that same changeless reality is the changing reality. We can't really run away from images and change, and we work into that equally as we function at that level of being illuminated. So, that is one aspect of one's own individual spiritual development.
And
Then,
Anilji, just wanted to
yeah,
add that when you're talking
yeah,
about that, the changing
yeah,
aspect and what we can actually do to try
yes,
and
Vijay.
work towards that, an important aspect besides the sacrificial will that has to be developed is also trying to hone in on the moral compass within each individual. The moral compass is sort of what is lacking now in today's world, where everywhere throughout the world, morality is not being taken seriously because that is sacrificed, as it were, at the expense of greed. And unless morality and the moral compass becomes strong, along with that sacrificial will, spiritual growth for the individual, which then transmits as growth for the whole of humanity, cannot be done. So that these are the two very important aspects: the moral compass and the sacrificial will. So
Yeah, absolutely correct. Yes, that's right, Vijayji. Okay, anyone else would like to please speak up or have any queries?
Sir, it has been very correctly put then, because the quality of human being, Homo sapiens, that is going down. So the question of morality, like they said earlier,
Yeah.
people were so nice and good
Binduji, can you
that
put your video on if it's okay? We are recording.
okay, okay, sir.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sorry. Yeah.
so
Yeah. Continue, please.
yeah, he said this only, that earlier the human beings were very powerful and great, and they would learn and retain, and the ways were good. So because that quality, like he's just said, that because of greed, morality is going down and the compass is going down. So it needs to be stabilized. So it is only because the quality of human being has come down. So in general, everywhere we are connected. Everywhere we are seeing this change.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
You see.
I get this. I get it
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah. John, you want to say something?
Well, see, in the olden times, which if we go into Atlantean times, human beings were made to be good. They were made to be spiritual. And even recently, we had a religious life which was forced upon people, but people didn't feel bad about that. And when these forces, or the good forces, are withdrawing because they've reached their evolution, they've done their work, and they're rising higher, these spiritual beings I mentioned, other beings take their place which aren't so kind and nice. So the qualities of sacrifice and just being interested in each other, interested where you're coming from, even if I disagree with you, that's not palatable to the modern consciousness. The modern consciousness is what's in it for me. This is what's developed. So now we have to make a conscious choice that we are going to be interested in each other to know really where are you coming from. I don't stand, even the people who we don't like, who are immoral, we still have to ask the question and be interested in them and not be so. In other words, we've got to be, you don't condone their actions, but you've got to be interested in those people and take them into your heart. And that's not going to be palatable to many people who are egotistical, and it's hard. You've got to be strong to be interested in someone's actions who you don't like. Where even if I use the word Hitler, I'm sure his mother liked him, if you get what I mean. Everyone's got some good qualities. about them, and we are to search out for those qualities. That takes a lot of work. That's a lot of self-development work as well. So that'd be our task for the future, but not many will want to take it off. And that's why I especially like what you said there, Vijay, because you've got to sacrifice this self to go into the other, to be interested in the world. And our world, to a certain extent, is other people, those that are around us. And what's happening today? We're pushing people away. We don't like this. We don't like that. We don't like, sure, but we've got to also make an active will to be interested in the world. So that'd be our future direction in which we are to go.
Okay. All right. We are almost coming to an hour and a half. We'll take
Anilji, I think there's
one more question.
Tejas is asking a question.
Yeah.
It's just a reflection, not a question. After this whole discussion, don't you think so that we should prefer more on a love to be kept at a first place? To be interested, I need to be, at one more thing ahead. I need to love them, and I have to see that from the glass of the love. Then I would rather, then I will be for sure interested. Then I would be. So just opening a heart chakra and flowing more love towards others and towards yourself, obviously, will make next move. This is what I personally felt after listening to this. Is there any correction? Then you can let me know.
No, thank you, Tejasji. You're definitely right in that aspect of love being the primary force that will drive sacrifice and growth and helping other people and then getting the moral compass on track. But the important thing to note is that it can be discussed ad nauseum without any break, but it can be only done by the individual and work on oneself. When one cannot change the world, if one wants to change the world, one has to start with oneself. And unless the change happens in oneself, the world cannot change.
Yes, absolutely. That's very beautifully put. All right. Anyone else?
Perfect.
Is there anyone? Yeah. Anyone? Any other questions, please?
Yes, Anilji, Pranam, Anilji, Rajesh here.
Pranam. Yes, Rajesh. Yeah, please.
Rajesh, Anilji, where we will put this our Satyug, Treta Yug, and Kali Yug in this entire discussion?
Okay. What about you, John? Do you want to answer that?
Look, from my understanding, Kali Yuga basically commenced about 3,000-4,000 years ago, when the spiritual world was lost on the majority of people. There was, when all they couldn't see there's a lower spiritual side where you could see the beings of plants and animals and nature. That was even lost about 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, and there were groups that still had it, but now the Atlantean period still had a lot of the higher beings. As I said, it wasn't full spirituality. Those beings I called archai, because they were falling into ignorance, if I use that term, they couldn't quite, they felt them, but they could only clearly see the archangels and the angels and walk with them at night, so to speak. So it was a gradual diminishing. So I can only go that far back. But if we go back into the Lemurian times, it was all open. It was purity, and that was the golden age. So time is an interesting thing, because we can only speak about our recent times, because there's different disputes as to how long the Atlantean, the Lemurian, and compare it to science, because science talks about millions of years, whereas if the laws of physics have changed before that, like before 8,000 BC, because that's when Steiner talks about they became fixed. If they were changing radioactivity and all those other laws, time is a bit of a question. So we can only go by the star signs. The golden age was before human beings fully incarnated into the physical body, but at that stage, the consciousness was also very childlike. We have to go into the embryo to get the consciousness of human beings. So it's different. We now have self-directing individual consciousness, but what does the embryo have when we're embryos, just before we're born, if you get the picture? So there's a difference. But the embryo is still living in the spiritual world. It is aware, it is experiencing all the beings that are around us. You might say self. It is experiencing self, but in a very deep state of consciousness, not an awake state. So that's the best I can. But we can get all sorts of dates with this. But the Atlantean period was what we call, I suppose, the not the Dark Age, but the age before it. They had a strong awareness of spiritual beings working in and amongst themselves.
So yeah, just to throw a little bit of light, when I was in Bombay, we had gone to that resort and we had a satsang. So there were some diagrams which we had given in that PDF document, in which there is a comparison of Treta Yuga and different yugas given by the Hindu scriptures and the Hindu sages compared to what actually Steiner has given. But just to add a little bit here, Rishi Master Byansa Duno had actually pointed out that Kali Yuga actually ended in 1999. Steiner has given similar references. And when we go back into our historical records, when Krishna left about 3,300 years, before Christ, about 3300 BC, when Krishna had actually left his physical body, that is when actually Kali Yuga started, And so like that, if we go deeper, you can actually get the equivalent comparisons sort of going forward. So hope that answers your query to some extent, Rajesh ji. Okay, anyone else? Any other query? We are getting good questions today.
Sir, can I just say something?
Yes, please. It's Poonam ji.
No, I'm Brinda.
Oh, Brinda ji. Yes, Brinda ji. Yeah. Come up on your video.
I don't know what's happening actually. No. What I was just feeling was it's more of a sharing that as Vijayji said, that it is important that you have to first work on your own self to resolve and understand your own thinking and your own beingness. And as John said, but everybody has something good in them. So what I've been feeling is that unfortunately for quite some time in the world, people keep feeling so and so has done this wrong, or somebody has not done this, and this something is wrong in this person. We keep looking at the negative aspects of every person around us, and likewise individually as well as in social structure also. But everything bad is not there either in one person or in the society or in the world. Unfortunately, we do not acknowledge or appreciate or say a good word to the other person. Oh, how nice, you have done this so beautifully, or this is something so nice in you. So we are not kind of acknowledging that. So that aspect doesn't kind of get encouraged, or it doesn't get life. So that I feel is so important for all of us to kind of encourage that in every being, in every society, in the world. If you acknowledge the goodness, that will kind of get more life force, I feel. And that unfortunately is not happening so much as it should, ideally. There are some, of course, who are making that effort, and all the rishis and the seers, they're all making us see that it is so important for you to see in your own self first and all these. But I think it's much more, that is what is needed, to acknowledge the beauty, the goodness that is what I think will be a good way to kind of, um, not allow the negativity to increase too much. Just a thought which came to
Yeah,
me.
it's a very beautiful thought. Vijayji or John, you want to just briefly reply?
Well, yes, I totally agree with you there, but this is our challenge. We're going to like love of ease rather than take an interest in other people. The forces are going to be strong for us not to do that. So through consciousness, we need to actually be aware of it and practice that. And there's nothing there. We're going to be totally free. This is a quality we're heading towards, what I call freedom. We are going to be free to choose that because the forces against it are going to be so strong. The forces for egotism will be really strong in us, so we consciously need to do it in freedom. And that's our, not duty, but that's the way to go forward, consciousness. And it's got to be deliberate.
Yeah.
But we can help each other by just even talking about this, we get reminded about it. And we may then, as Vijay says, we've got to do it ourselves, in ourselves. And I think that's so important. We can do it in a group, we can talk about it, but unless we practice that every day, whether you go to the shopkeeper and you take notice of the shopkeeper and smile at them, or whether that person who pulls in front of you and gives you no indicator in the car, do you get angry? Do you press the horn? Or do you say, no, that's okay. He's having his way. You know what I mean? Like, so it's really going to be an effort for us into the future, and it's going to be harder and harder, but we need to encourage each other to do it. So it's a great thought that you have.
Thank you. Thank you.
Beautiful. All right.
Vijay?
Anyone else? Yes. So I think everyone has had a say. Does anyone want to speak anything before we close?
Hello, Anilji.
Yes,
Kavita.
Kavita. Yes, please. Yeah.
I have a question, not just a question. Um, Everything is destined. Means whatever is happening is already destined. So that means the growth of humanity from this different periods, 7 periods. So that has also been destined. That is my query. Is that
Yeah,
destined? And
yes.
second query is that is the rule of destiny are there in other worlds like astral world? So वहाँ पे भी everything is destined over there also?
Yeah, very good question. John, do you want to answer that?
There's a plan. It's like a skeleton. But how you fill it out is now going to be up to you, me, and them, and everyone else. We've got this quality called freedom, so it's not entirely destined. We're destined to be a male, female, with capacities and faculties due to our karma, but we can be free to change the course. This is the destiny. The destiny of human beings was to have the possibility of freedom. So, for instance, we can actually be free to destroy the world, despite what the spiritual beings have planned for us in the karma. We can actually destroy it. If humanity chooses that, we can stop evolution here and now, but also we can be free to choose our evolution in what the gods wanted for us. Now, what the gods want for us is going to be against our nature, our impulses that we're getting now, because they're going to be the forces of ignorance that are going to be working in us, and we're going to, in freedom, choose not to take them up. That means egotism, greed, and whatever. They're going to be very strong. And also the dislike of other people. Those forces are going to be, we're going to push people away, but we've got the freedom to not push them away. So it won't be destiny. The destiny is that those forces are going to be there, but we've got the choice. Do we take up our freedom, or do we flow with what comes out of our impulses? So and that's what I said, that at the end of this age, there will be a number of people, but it won't be everybody. And many people will choose to go the way of the forces that are impelling them: sexual, immorality, greed, whatever, and hatred. Many people will just go with them, but some will choose to go against that. So we've got that choice. There can be, otherwise it wouldn't be freedom. So we've got this quality of freedom, but we've only got this quality now, recently. It's only, the doorway to freedom happened only a few hundred years ago, and we're just starting to choose. Up until about, I'll say 700 years ago, our destiny, it was destiny, more or less. We could choose to be good or bad, and we come back and we pay our karma. But now the true freedom has only come a few hundred years ago, and it will increase. This quality of freedom will either increase or totally decrease, where we will become servants to our baser impulses. So that'd be our choice. We have been given, you might say the gods have said, or God, or whatever you want to call it, have said, look, we've brought you to this point where you could now choose. And now it's going to be up to you. I'm going to withdraw for a while. So that's going to be our choice. And that's beautiful, isn't it? That we can actually choose, but it's going to be hard. There'll be pain. There'll be sacrifice, as Vijay means. But we will choose consciously. Are we going to choose that, or are we not? That'll be up to us. And nobody else will choose for you.
So, Kavita ji, I just wanted to do we have time, Anil ji, just to?
Yeah.
So
We are
basically,
running out of time, isn't it?
your question circles around the point where a lot of all the saints and sages in the past have said that not a leaf moves without the will of that eternal consciousness. Everything happens as it is meant to happen. So that particular statement is in reference to the circumstance, the position that is going to be offered to that individual at that point in time, right now. And that is the consequence of the prarabdha karma. So whatever is there as part of the prarabdha karma, that situation is presented to that individual at that particular point in time. You can't change that. That is already fixed. But one has the liberty at that point in time to act upon what requires to be done, morally right, sacrificially right, or whatever, to be able to create a situation where, as they say, you form the agami karmas, which then go back to the sanchita karmas. So that's going into the technical details. But when you're talking about the action that happens, that is being offered to you at that point in time, to be able to take the right course of action or the wrong course of action, as John just mentioned about, we can destroy the world or we can go the right path. We have the choice after the situation is presented to us as part of the prarabdha karma. Then the action can take place to do it the right way. But never, ever, if one wants to grow on the path, never should one hanker after the fruit of that action, because the hankering after the fruit of the action is the biggest cause of misery, because one can have expectations and one is bound to be disappointed. Have no expectations, one will never be disappointed.
Okay. Very beautiful. Very beautiful.
Sir, I want to say one line. I know we are very late, but it's a forum. One wants it to go on and on. It's very nice. I just want to add to this that God or consciousness, what we used to call God, and consciousness are the same. It's a very neutral thing. आप पूजा करो आप पूजा नहीं करो, whether you worship or you don't worship. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't say don't come back to me. You can again go the next day after missing a few days. He doesn't say anything. It's our own doing. So there is no rule set there. He's very neutral. He says go by your way. Whatever. If I want, I feel Tuesday को non-veg नहीं खाना. अब रात के 12 बज गए. Let me eat it now. He won't come and stop. Nobody comes and stops me for anything. It's an example. So, like Kavita ji is saying, it's all our doing. And I really sometimes feel that how can we not be like God when we are as parents, we behave like parents. कुछ भी गलत हो, something goes wrong, we make a big face, we shout, we try and stop our children, then we don't love them after that for some time. So why can't we be neutral? That we are neutral. You do whatever. It's the ball is in your court, so you do whatever. So I feel like that. It's a very neutral and very calm thing. Everything is welcome, good, bad, whatever is happening is okay. It's our own self that we have to look into and work on. You can tell me if I'm wrong somewhere. I don't.
Absolutely correct. Yeah. Beautiful, Binduji. You have matured.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right. Vijayji, would you like to just now say a few words and we'll close?
Yes, so the gist of this entire discussion is every individual is required to find one's own path, but the path should be hopefully one that one chooses to be that with the right moral compass and with an attitude of sacrifice to help other people. To start off with, it will be conscious. One will do it consciously, trying to really make an effort to do it. But when one reaches a plane of self-sacrifice, when that little self is sacrificed to be one with that pure self, then there is no other. Then automatically that love, that sacrifice is automatic. There is nothing to be done, with an intent. It will be intentless. It will happen without any intent. That is the sum and bonum of spiritual life. And then life goes on. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vijayji. John, do you want to just 1 minute say something and then we'll close?
No, not it. Vijay summarized it very nicely.
And beautifully, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, John.
Thank
and
you,
thank you,
Anilji.
Vijayji. And
Thank
thanks
you.
to everybody for attending. And in 4 weeks' time, we'll meet again for a heartfelt discussion and another topic. Thank you very much for attending.
you.
And all of you, wherever
Thank you.
you are,
Thank you,
have a
Anil.
good evening and a
Thank you
good
so much.
afternoon.